Writing the book and making the story public wasn't the difficult part of it for me. I'm a writer and that's what I do, so I'm quite used to writing about myself and about my story, and I'd written smaller things about my story before, so I'd come to terms with the fact that I was going to be writing about it. I think I always knew I was going to write about it. I didn't know necessarily that it was going to be a book, but I think if I hadn't done the book it would have been perhaps an extended feature or article. So for me, writing about it wasn't the difficult bit. The difficult bit was going on the journey and was meeting my birth family. Going back to Eritrea and seeing how my family lived was brought up some very complicated feelings for me, because while I in many ways wished that I had lived with them, I also got to see firsthand the way that they live, and they have had. I mean, they're very rural. They're relatively poor, and so it was quite shocking for me in some ways, seeing perhaps sort of through my sister, seeing the life I could have led or perhaps should have led. And at the time I felt quite envious in a way, and I remember when I saw little kids around, so I've got loads of nephews and nieces running around in Eritrea, and feeling quite envious of the life that they were living, of this kind of almost idyllic seeming child's life in Africa. It can look very, very nice, and I felt that I'd missed out on quite a lot, and I still feel, although I have a very loving and very warm adoptive family, I still feel that I missed out by not growing up with my birth family. I missed out by the fact that I didn't meet a blood relative until I was 30. That is something that's very difficult to deal with as you're growing up. It doesn't matter if you've grown up in the West, relatively wealthy, compared to a birth family, say, who live in the developing world. You still feel a loss and a sadness for not having grown up with your birth family. Recommendations. Well, my book isn't a how-to guide. It's definitely not, don't do it just because I've done it, or don't do it exactly how I did it. It's my experience. It's one person's experience of tracing the birth family. Having said that, I obviously learned quite a lot from the journey. Advice, well, proceed with caution. That's probably the best advice I can give. Don't expect your birth family to somehow make you whole or to complete you. Expect them to almost throw up more questions than they answer, if they can answer any questions, or if they're prepared to answer any questions at all. They'll probably lead to more questions and more questions. And remember that if you do find them, you can't unfind them. So don't undertake the process lightly. That doesn't mean don't do it, but it means don't rush into doing it. There's no time limit. I took a very long time. I took from discovering I had birth family still alive to finding them. That was a period of almost 10 years. So I thought about it for a very long time. I did it quite slowly. That would probably be my best. Go very slowly, go carefully, be honest, be open with everybody, but don't expect any quick fix for kind of any problems you might have. In terms of my relationship with my family now, yeah, I'm building a relationship with them now. There are a few difficulties. Obviously, they live very far away. There's also a language, well, it was a language barrier, but I'm trying to overcome it. I'm learning Tigrinya, or I'm trying to learn Tigrinya. I'm having classes, so I'm trying to overcome that language barrier. And that for me is a really big deal, and I think has made quite a big difference. But yeah, I mean, two of my brothers speak very good English. We're on email contact fairly regularly. I go back to Eritrea when I can. I was last back just over a year ago. And then I've also got family. I mean, I've got Eritrean family in the UK, in the United States, in Europe. So I'm doing a little tour of family around the globe. Eritreans get spread very far and wide. So I'm working on seeing my family all across the world. I was very lucky because my adoptive dad knew a lot about the country that I was adopted from. He's an academic, and Eritrea is one of his specialist areas. So from as far back as I can remember, he was trying to educate me about Eritrea, and that was incredibly important. That said, I didn't want to know for a very long time. I didn't want to know anything about Eritrea, and I resisted all of his attempts to educate me. It was only when I got a lot older and a bit more secure in myself that I wanted to know more about where I was from. So I think had my dad tried even harder, I probably would have resisted even longer. Having said that, I think it would definitely have made things easier if I'd been able to visit Eritrea when I was younger, without a doubt. And that goes for whether or not you're adopted. You know, I think children growing up in any sort of diaspora situation benefit from knowing about where they're from a very early age. And the best way to know, the best way not to be fearful of where you're from, is to be able to visit it, whether that's Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, anywhere. I think regular integration just stops the place that you're from becoming a sort of scary place. In terms of if it had changed me, if I'd known more, I think if I'd had more of a connection. I mean, when I was growing up, there was no Habesha community where I was growing up in the UK at the time. And I think if I'd had that sort of connection, that might have made things a lot easier for me, definitely. I might have picked up the language. I could have gone to Saturday schools, perhaps, if they'd had them. I would have known more about the food. I would have known lots more cultural stuff, which would have helped, not only when I visited, but also it would have helped it would have stopped Eritrea feeling so far away.